Hi guys, so today, even though I'm not here, we're going to talk about order of operations. You guys have done this before. You may have called it GEMDOS or PEMDOS. We're going to call it GEMA. We'll go over why we're calling it GEMA a little bit further on, but it is going to be the same way. I saw on some of you guys' district e-cards you were remembering how to do the order of operations, which is great. So for many of us, this is going to just be a review. So the first thing you have been given from your teacher is one of these foldables. What I'd like you to do is fold it in half this way. Just like this, okay? You got it folded in half. It's already cut for you, so all you have to do is fold it, get your glue, and you're going to glue on the back only and stick it down. All right, so now that we have glued in our notes, our GEMAs, we are going to open the first flap. So again, remember, we're going to, let's go ahead and title our paper first. So we're going to call it Order of Operations. And remember, we're calling it GEMA here, but it's the same thing as PEMDOS or GEMDOS, if you've ever learned that before. When I was in school, they called it Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally. But we are going to call it GEMAs today. So you're going to open your first flap. It says grouping symbols. And if we look over here, we have parentheses, a bracket, a different type of bracket, and fractions. So each section of the fraction would be a group. I also want to point out that a square root is a grouping symbol. So if you see that radical, that is a grouping symbol. So please make sure you are drawing that radical on here. So when we are looking at an equation, such as the one before, 25 minus, in parentheses, 8 plus 7, close your parentheses, divided by 5 plus 3 squared times 2. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to solve for anything within a grouping. So what I'd like you to do is get out a highlighter and highlight the grouping, which is going to be that parentheses. So we are highlighting our parentheses. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to solve 8 plus 7. So what is 8 plus 7? You're not sure? Use your calculator and type it in. 8 plus 7 is equal to 15. So we now have 25 minus 15 divided by 5 plus 3 squared times 2. So we've done our first step. Our first step was to combine these two that are inside of a grouping symbol, the parentheses, to get the minus 15, or to get the 15, and we subtract. My next step, if we look, is E. E stands for exponential operations. Remember, exponent is when we have that itty bitty thing up high or a square root. So, in this case, we are going to go ahead and we are going to do either squaring or square root. Remember, I mentioned that the radical itself is a grouping symbol. That means if we had something like the square root of 6 plus 2, you're going to answer 6 plus 2. When we see the square root here, that means we are going to solve for the square root. So our next thing is exponential symbols. So if we take a look at our equation, we see that this 3 is our exponent. So highlight that, or sorry, that 2 is our exponent. So highlight that itty bitty 2 there, because that means we are squaring the number 3. So again, what is 3 squared? It's 9. So let's go ahead and fill in our next step. We're taking from what we had before. We still have the 25 minus 15 divided by 5, except for this time we have the 3 squared, which is 9, plus 9 times 2. We're going to go ahead and now we'll close our E for exponents, and we're going to go to M. Now this is where it gets a little bit different from GEMDOS if you've used GEMDOS before. This time, instead of M meaning just multiplication, it means multiplication or division. Either one, multiplication and division. Do we see that here? So if we look at our equation that we have, the 25 minus 15 divided by 5 plus 9 times 2. We are going to move from left to right. So write that on this side here, above left to right. It is the same as if you were reading. You're moving from the left of the equation to the right. You're looking for either the multiplication or the division. So I'm going to take my highlighter now, and I'm going to highlight anytime I see a division or multiplication in this. So I have 15 divided by 5, and I have 9 times 2. So I'm going to go ahead and solve both of these. 15 divided by 5 is 3, and 9 times 2 is 18. So in my next line, we are still working over here. I'll bring it down a little bit lower. So we'll do it here. Actually, I'd rather keep it all together. So in this line, we're going to do 25 minus 3 plus 18. If everybody sees, the 3 came from the 15 divided by 5 here. The 18 came from the 9 times 2. My last letter in GEMA is A. Just like with multiplication, it means either adding or subtracting. It can be either one. And just like with multiplication, we are going left to right. So if I am now looking at what I have left, pretty much everything left is going to be either addition or subtracting, and we are going left to right. So this is the entire problem we're going to highlight, because everything we have left is either addition or subtracting. If you get to the A part of GEMAS and you see something that is not addition or subtraction, you need to take a look and see if you made a mistake someplace. So now we are going to just go in a line. So I'm going to do each step together here. Oh, the 40 is the answer. Sorry, 40 is your answer. So we're going to do 25 minus 3 is going to be 22. I now have 22 plus 18. My next line, I'm going to find 22 plus 18, and that is 40. That's our answer. So I'm sorry if you guys highlighted the 40. The 40 is not part of the equation. It is the answer. So I'd like to take some time and practice a few GEMAS problems together to see if we can do this on our own. Everybody look over here is my cat. If you missed him, rewind. So let's try this problem. Let's try... We're going to do this absolute value of negative 5 times 3 plus 12. So on your side of your paper, you should be following along with me and doing the steps. So the first thing we're going to look for is our grouping symbols. What grouping do we have? I look at my notes if I can't remember, and I see absolute values. Are they on here for grouping? They should be. So absolute value is when you see two straight lines. Sorry, I'm having computer problems. All right, my computer should not die anymore. So when we have this, we see our absolute value is a grouping symbol. I just mentioned that. Make sure that's in your notes as well. When we do absolute value, that means anything that's inside of the absolute value is going to be turned positive once you've finished adding or subtracting or whatever you might need to do in there. In this case, we just have a negative 5. So my first step would be to take care of my absolute value, and that would make my number just 5. My next thing I see here is I have 5. I just bring everything down. 5 times 3 plus 12. What would my next step be? Do we have any exponents that we have to worry about on this equation? No, we do not. We now move on to the multiplication piece. I see I have 5 times 3. I'm going to take my 5 times 3, and I am going to multiply them together. 5 times 3 is 15 plus 12. My last step is I'm going to add these two together. 15 plus 12 is 27. So my final answer in this equation, or in this expression, is 27. We're going to try just a few more. Our next problem, my next problem is, as you see, 3 times the square root of 9 plus 4 squared minus 6. Things are now getting a little bit more complicated. Still, if we use our GEMAS chart, we should be fine. So the first thing we're going to do is we are looking for groupings. Are there any groupings? So when we take a look on our inside, do we see any of these symbols used here? I do see the radical. So I know we need to do first anything that is underneath this square root. So that means we are solving everything under here first. So I have 9 plus 4 squared. Can I do my 9 plus 4 next? No. The next thing, so I know I'm doing stuff under here, but what is my next thing? I have an addition and I have an exponent. So what would come first? E is the next letter, so I know I'm doing my exponent. So I'm going to do 4 squared, which is 16, plus 9. I still have my square root. I have my 3 on the outside, and I have subtract 6. I'm still not done underneath the radical. I see I have 9 plus 16. I have to finish everything under this radical before I can touch any of the other numbers. So I'm going to now do 9 plus 16, which is equal to 25. So now I have the square root of 25, minus 6 over here, and I still have my 3 on the outside. Now we're finally almost done. We are done with everything under the radical, so we are going to go to our next letter, which is E. And remember, for E, it is solve either exponents or solve square roots. So I now have a number that needs to be square rooted. So I'm going to take the square root of 25, which is 5. I'll drop down everything else. So I drop down my 6, and I'm going to drop down my 3. Now, when we have this 3 on the outside, that means times. So we can either add parentheses or a dot to indicate times. I prefer parentheses because it's easy for me to tell what I'm doing. So I now have 3 times 5 minus 6. So I'm done with my exponents. I have no more exponents. I have no more square roots to look at. My next step is to look for something that is either multiplication or division. I see I have 3 times 5. So I'm going to do that first. 3 times 5 is 15 minus 6. My last step is either addition or subtraction. I'm on to subtraction, so I'm going to do 15 minus 6, and my final answer is 9. Alright, so we are almost done with our notes. This is going to be our last one that we're going to do. Our first step, when we're looking at this, what would our first step be? Our first step, of course, is groupings. So let's look at our review for groupings again. We have absolute value, radicals, parentheses, brackets, and fraction. So each piece of a fraction is a piece of the group. So let's solve the top first, because the same way, just as when you do addition and multiplication, we are going from left to right. So we have this first top piece. Now I see I have it in a parentheses, which is like a grouping within a grouping, and I see I have an exponent on the outside. So the first step I will do is to do the inside of my parentheses, 3 plus 7, which is equal to 10. So I now have 10 squared. Like this. Everything else stays the same, and it is very important that you are rewriting everything else down. If we do not rewrite everything else down, we might miss a step. So now I still have 10 squared on top, and it's still not completely resolved. So we're going to resolve that piece before we can move on to any of the other two groupings in the situation. So if you're not sure what 10 squared is, type that into your calculator. Squared is 100, so I now have 100 on top. I have 8 minus 3 on the bottom, and I have minus 16 times 5 over here. So when I do my next piece, so I've now done everything I can on the top, it's 100, I can't do anything else. So now I'm going to move to the next grouping, which is down here, 8 minus 3. If you're not sure what that is, type that into your calculator, and your bottom will be 5. So we have 100 divided by 5 minus 16 times 5. Remember, if you see a dot like this, that dot indicates multiplication. You can also see a star or parentheses. They all indicate multiplication, but I do want to start getting us away from using the x for multiplication, because that will be confusing in our next section when we start using x as a variable. So we have 100 divided by 5 minus 16 times 5. We have done all of our top groupings, all of our groupings here. We have also done everything and solved both of these groupings. So now our next step is multiplication or division. So do we have multiplication or division left in this problem? The answer is yes. This fraction bar indicates division. So we're doing 100 divided by 5. Type that into your calculator. And we get 20. So I have 20 minus 16 times 5. Now, am I done with my multiplication and division step? Is there any more multiplication and division that I need to do? The answer is yes. I still have this 16 times 5. I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, so I'm going to type it into the calculator. 16 times 5, and I have 80. So I now have 20 minus 80. Is there any more multiplication or division that I can do in this problem? So our final and last step is either addition or subtraction. So I am going to do 20 minus 80, and I get negative 60. That is my final answer.